well when you applaud before I speak. That's a really good thing. Thank you. And thanks for your perseverance in staying so long. I'm hugely impressed. The Scottish Learning, teachers in education, you're really fabulous. You know that anyway, but I go to loads of seminars and colloquiums and conferences. You guys have a festival. And then I come in here today and you've got this set up. This is called the cabaret setup. You know how to live, I'll tell you. If I'm invited again, I'm going to stay overnight because I'm sure there's stuff goes on here that'd be worth seeing. Thanks very much for inviting me along. I'm absolutely delighted to be here. Although I'm a male of a particular age from the west of Scotland, so statistically I'm delighted to be anywhere. And I could see out of that lovely introduction, thanks very much for that, Heather, it was embarrassing, that the one thing that surprised you was 39 years of police, wasn't it? You didn't think, you're looking at me thinking, how did you? I joined very, very young. What I want to do, I think, is sort of confirm from you from the outset that I'm not a teacher. I am not a scientist, I'm not an academic, and I'm not a researcher. Okay, these are not idle boasts. I'm happy not to be of any of these things because other people do it better than me. So, but what I need to do then is I need to establish, before we go any further, a sort of baseline so that we're all talking about the same thing at the same time. So this is a sort of interactive thing, even though it's in cabaret, it's a sort of interactive thing. So I'm going to ask a question which is multiple choice. Although there's 2 in it, does that count as multiple choice? Or do you need 4? Do you need one that's really outrageous and 2 that are close, that sort of thing? There's only an option of 2 here. And I want you to think carefully before you respond. Because if you respond wrongly, you're going to look really dumb. Anyway, I want you to put your hand up if you're not a son or a daughter. Cool. So we can start there. We're all humans. Yeah? So let's start from there. Because I think one of the things that happens, and has happened over the past 4 or 5 decades, is we've started to get so caught up in the notion of professionalism, of process, of plans, of leaders. Follow the leader, and you follow him, he'll have a plan, and it usually is a him. We follow him, and everything will be fixed. And it hasn't really. Now, there's a place for plans, so I'm not knocking on the head, but let's think about ourselves as humans first of all. Because I don't think you can do the job that you do every day and do it well unless you take your whole self to work every day. Unless you go to work and take your compassion and your humanity and your empathy to work every day. If you don't do that, I don't think it's going to work. Because, remember Gordon Brown used to say it's the economy stupid. Well, it's not. It's relationships stupid. That's what works. That's the reason we're top of the food chain. Simple as that. So that's the other thing I'll keep reminding you of. I'm not that bright, so things need to be quite straightforward and binary for me. So nice, simple things. We watch TV, and we watch things like, what was on the night before last? I went back home, and it was, that's Long Lost Relatives. You know that? Oh, did you watch that? It's a bit iffy, isn't it? That really gets me, that stuff. And if you watch the Commonwealth Games, which were fabulous, and you watch sports people winning things, you watch the postman from Motherwell, does he not make you smile? If you see Kathleen Granger getting a medal and getting upset at the Olympics, did you get upset? That's because we're connected. That's empathy. That's on a television screen. You don't even know who they are, but you connect to them. You immediately identify with them. That's that empathy. That's the glue that holds society together. And it's not there. If we're disconnected, that's when we have real challenges. So we're born connected and we stay connected. And the reason that the human brain is the size that it is not so that you can tweet and get CPD certificates for ranges of things. It's actually so that you can establish and maintain relationships. That's how we do it. That's how we're the top of the food chain. That's how we adapt to things that are around us. That's the one thing that we're really, really good at. So I'm going to hopefully tease some of that out. And also, as well, as was indicated, violence is my thing. Well, actually, violence prevention is my thing. So at some point, I'll frame some things around that violence because that's my experience, and so that I can hopefully put some context in that. But that's the other things about being human. There is connections to stuff. It's professions that create silos and gangs. It's not humans. It's professions that do it. And you know, I've done lots of work with gangs, but the gangs that are the most difficult to crack are the gangs like social work and health and education and police. They're the most difficult. They're territorial, they have their own language, they're very protective, they have their own budgets. Really, really difficult. That's why partnership's difficult. You're much better doing things on your own, believe me. Much better doing it on your own. Investigating a murder, technical skill. Don't need any partnerships. Great. Everybody works for me. They know who the boss is. We've got a single goal. We want to solve this murder. We just do it. No lots of discussion involved in that. If I introduce, if you're an A&E doctor, if she's standing with her team and somebody gets brought in from an accident, she doesn't need to work in partnership. The team work for her. They do the stuff. They get it done. But if you ask her and I to work together on something jointly, it's a real challenge. And it steals the energy. It steals the energy. So hopefully I'll maybe speak a wee bit about how we might get over that, certainly in my experience. So it's that idea of hopefully it'll make sense as we go along. I'm not saying that we don't need strategies, we don't need policies, because we absolutely do. I'm not saying that we don't need to be technically proficient at what we do, therefore professional at what we do. But I'm going to suggest that there are perhaps some other things that are as important and we've perhaps forgotten about. This is Herman Melville. I'm always tempted to ask teachers, right, who's Herman Melville? Somebody will, no, I'm not going to go there, sorry. He wrote Moby Dick. And he's noting that we cannot live only for ourselves. 1,000 fibers connect us with our fellow men, and among those fibers, as sympathetic threads, our actions run as causes, and they come back to us as effects. Empathy, connection. We're born connected. And if we're not connected, it's really, really difficult. Adam Smith, how selfish soever a man may be supposed, there are evidently some principles in his nature which interest him in the fortune of others and render their happiness necessary to him, though he derives nothing from it except the pleasure of seeing it. We're quite unusual humans like that, but that's empathy. That's what connects us together. That's what pulls us together, and hugely important. Now, you'll have seen, I expect, or heard Harry Burns speak about sense of coherence. So I'm only going to go over it just briefly, but you should Google Harry Burns. Harry Burns is ex-chief medical officer, Sir Harry Burns. You'll get him on YouTube. Hugely, hugely impressive, and had been a significant figure in Scotland in getting us where we are and the way we think about things. But Aaron Antonovsky was a sociologist, and what he did is he wanted to understand how children who were born in the camps during the Holocaust, or were young children in the camps, how they were as adults. What impact did that have on their life? And so he did that. He tracked lots of people in that category. And he found, as you would expect, a huge number of those individuals did not have good lives. They didn't have good mental health, they didn't have good physical health, good relationships. They had really difficult lives, as you would imagine. But importantly, there was a few who were absolutely fine, who were really, really enjoying good lives. And so, based on that notion that we should think about the things that make us healthy and know the things that make us unhealthy, concentrating the positive rather than the negative, the possible rather than the impossible, then that's who Antonovsky studied, the people who survived and survived well. And he found that they had three things in common. And he called that a sense of coherence. And a lack of this sense of coherence is stressful. And the first of those was that your world is structured, predictable, and explicable. You need to see your world like that. The second one is that you've got the internal resources to meet the demands that come at you. And the last one is that the demands are seen as challenges worthy of investment, right? So let's think about that. Let's think you're a 9-year-old who is not thinking about what they're going to do when he leaves school. He's thinking about what's going to happen when he gets home that night, because all he can do is get through that day. So the idea of us planning a future for him beyond that day is an alien concept. You know that, and I know that. His world is neither explicable or structured. He's no control over it. He's living in stress. And we shouldn't have children living stressful lives. Stress is no a good thing, although there is good stress and bad stress, and some of the good stuff is fine. Some of the bad stuff is not fine at all. And you've got the internal resources to deal with it. Sometimes they don't. The most important 4 years of a child's life are up to age 3. That's where they acquire those human attributes that help them make good decisions about themselves, help them to communicate, to negotiate, to compromise. That's why the early years is hugely important. And the science is cast iron in this. I should just say as an aside as well, I may use a phrase like emerging evidence. What I actually mean is I've just found out about it, right? So don't think there's some great bit of stuff. So sometimes emerging evidence for me could be 25 years out of date, and you all know about it. But I get quite excited when it's something new. And you think that the challenges are seen as worthy of taking on. And that's the way life is. There's nothing I can do about it. Why should I do something about it? There's nothing I can do about it. That's the way life is. And that sense of coherence, a lack of that coherence. And if you think about it in your own lives, and if you're late for something, if the train breaks down and you're going for an interview, if something happens like that, all of a sudden your life is you've no control over it. It's difficult. It's stressful. For us, it's usually only a transitory thing, so it's absolutely fine. You'll get over it. You know that. You just switch on Classic FM, is what I do, and just chill out. And what are you going to do? You know that if you're not dead on time, you're dead on arrival. That's how I used to operate. So people were usually on time when they came to see me. But it was that sort of thing will happen all the time. It also happens when you hear things like, excuse me, it's a man flu. If you hear things, where men prefer to be in prison rather than out, they're happy to be back in prison. The Daily Mail thinks that's because the headline is, that prisons are so soft. The headline for me would be, society's so bad, they would rather be locked up. That's the real headline. And they would rather be in the jail because when they're in the jail, their world is at least partly explicable. They have some control over it. And they will be able to cope with the stuff that's there because they understand that environment. Where they come out, there will be chaos. Alcohol, drugs, violence, perhaps homeless, a whole range of things that make it not a good option to come out. Really, really difficult. So Antonovsky, that notion of stress, and it applies to everybody. It applies to everyone. And so when we're thinking about some of the kids that will be in your classrooms, some days their lives will be in absolute chaos. Some days they'll be just coping. Others will be coping. And then sometimes they'll be thriving. And that happens with kids. You'll know them. They're there. But it also happens to us. It happens to professionals. Some days you'll be sitting there thinking, this is mad. This stuff's coming on. We do that all the time. And so you need that time for personal reflection. You need that time to just, and it's really, really difficult. That's about your own well-being. So while you can't care for someone else unless you care for yourself. You can't do that. You just can't. Although it's equally true, people who are not cared for don't care. So it's important that you have that time for reflection, that notion. I always use an example for this. In 30-odd years, the last 9 years in the police, I was in the violence reduction unit, so I was non-operational. Did this stuff. But up until then, I worked in lots of murders. In Scotland, we don't have homicides, we have murders, because we say murder much better than we say homicide. And I have to tell you from personal experience, if you say it in America, you get invited back. And they give you one of those tickets that allows you to turn left on the plane and not right. I really like those tickets. Say murder again, John? Okay. So I say murder a lot when I'm over there. Anyway, one of the things that happens because I worked in the west of Scotland is we had lots of murders. Lots of them. So we were really good at investigating them. We were absolutely dreadful at preventing them because we concentrated on our professional stuff to say, how do we investigate this? And people came from London, people came from Canada, people came from the States, people came from Europe to see how Strathclyde police investigated murders because our detection rate was 98-point-something%. And it will never be 100% because we're always investigating another murder. There's always one in the go. We were really good at that, and that's where we invested all the time, in making our detectives as good as they could be and better. World class. We developed family liaison officers. We developed crime scene managers. A whole range of specialist skills. Interview advisors. A whole range of, we were great at that. Great at that stuff. But we were absolutely crap at preventing them. We just had no idea about how to prevent it. And the huge and overwhelming majority of our murders are a happenstance. The violence is deliberate. The outcome is a happenstance. And that's because young men don't think about the notion that if I stab someone in the upper chest, I'll hit a major structure and it'll cause damage. They don't think like that. They carry a knife because all their pals carry a knife, because probably their dads and their uncles did. They conform to an expectation that's there. And we've changed that over the past 10 years, where we've got admissions to hospital for knife injuries down 34%. Possession of knives for under 16s is down 70-odd%. Gang fighting's an exception rather than the norm, and murders have gone from, I think, 160-odd to 60-odd in the space of 9 years. We've still a way to go, but we've started to deal with that better than we did. But I had and I still have, I have one unsolved murder in my, which really annoys me. It annoys me personally, and it annoys me as well for the families that are involved in that. Because I always believed that relationships were important. And so when I was investigating a murder, I would go and visit the victim's relatives on the first day of the murder and introduce myself to them and say, I'm the person who's going to investigate the murder of your son. And I would take along my family liaison officer and say, he or she, whoever it was, when you're speaking to them, and you'll speak to them every day, you're speaking to me. But if you want to speak to me, just ask. And the next time you see me, I'll come and tell you that I've arrested the person who killed your son. And I did that all my service. And then I had a double murder, which I didn't solve. And it was really, really difficult. And what I tried to do was turn that negative into a positive, do something about it. So what I did, I wrote a closure report so that when it is solved, because I have an idea who did it, but I just can't prove it, if it is solved, somebody will be able to open a box and read a book, and in the book will be all the answers. Will be what I was doing, what I was thinking, what I did, what I didn't do, where the gaps were, so at least I was leaving something. But the hardest moment, and one of the hardest things I've ever had to do, was speak to those families again and tell them I couldn't do it. And that was really, really difficult. Telling a son that I couldn't find the man who murdered his dad. Telling a wife that I couldn't find the man or the men who murdered her husband was hugely difficult, hugely difficult. And at that point, I was just cool. Just cool. And the reason I wasn't in chaos is because I had a good team run about me that we had built up when we were there. Hugely important. And a good family as well. I've been married 40 years to the same woman and have 2 daughters. So living in a cloud of the East region for all these years has tempered me a little bit, I suppose. Where I'm there, you would do that. This is, excuse me, this is a quote from a book called Letting Go. It's in a series, Postcards from Scotland, which Carol Craig at the Centre for Conference and Wellbeing is the publishing editor on it. And this is a book about breathing new life. And they're saying, operating within a bureaucratic hierarchy, we effortlessly become less than we should be, and little by little betray the potential of our humanity. We do that. We do it without thinking. Because there is an assumption when we get employed and we apply for jobs, there's an assumption that because you're human, you'll bring all these human attributes with you. But we sometimes devalue them by saying it's unprofessional to do something. I mean, the classic will be as teachers, you know, I was speaking at something and taking questions from the audience, and this woman said, I heard, you know when somebody says, I heard that, you know it's going to be something really out there. And she said, I heard that a wee boy fell in a primary school, and the head teacher, they couldn't pick him up, and they had to phone his parents to do that. And I found it really difficult to respond sensibly, but I said, what I'll do is, I've got some money, because I was a police officer and retired now, so it's easy. If you come across a situation like that, pick the Wayne up and give him a cuddle, and see if somebody wants to sue you or sack you, give me a shout. I know loads of really good lawyers. I think we should take it on, because it'll not happen. It won't happen. Because it's that notion again where the process and the professional stuff starts to take over. Recent examples of that, Declan Haney, a wee baby who died, and we don't even know when he died. But when we check it, all the processes were followed. They were all followed. But we don't know what happened. And he still died. Because we never come to the conclusion that we don't know what to do. We come to the conclusion that we didn't do it. And why is that? We don't do it as professionals, but I bet you'd have done it as a mother or a sister or a daughter if you thought about it that way. Not as a social worker or as a teacher or as a police officer, but you thought about it another way. Another classic example of where process is just taken over, the wee boy King who was dying of a brain tumor. And his mum and dad wanted to do the best for him, so took him out of the hospital. And the result of that within 3 days is they were in a jail in Spain, and their wee boy was in a hospital 200 miles away. Well, it'd be kilometers in Spain, isn't it? Well, 200 and something kilometers away. In the hospital. That's not what we meant to do. That was medical staff who were genuinely concerned for that wee boy's well-being, but they didn't know what to do. So they went to the police and said, this wee boy's at risk. And here's what the police can do. We can give people the jail. You know? The only solution we have is a hammer. Every problem's a nail. That's all we can do. Give them the jail. And that's what we did. But eventually, and I think it was a chief constable, said, hod the bus. Although it'd be English, he wouldn't say hod the bus. But he would say, really, is this what we wanted to happen here? And it wasn't. And then we get it sorted out very quickly after that. And I think we need more of that thought in it. We need more of that. And in terms of leaders, if there's leaders in here, although I think we're all leaders, we need to create that environment that allows that to happen. We need to create that environment that says you can make mistakes. If you're doing something that's human and genuine, it'll be fine. We had a chief constable, Leslie Sharp, and when he came, we used to have about five ring binders of standing orders. You know, here's what you do if somebody hands in a black and white car. Oh, there you go, and there'd be something what you did. Here's what you do if somebody's lost it. You had an absolute standard operating procedure for everything. It was a nightmare, because you were always getting into trouble for not doing what was in the bloody forum. And when he came, he got a big bin and went, as long as what you're doing is legitimate, is honest, is an honest belief that you're making things better, he would support us. And he did. Bin. Of course, we've moved back a wee bit. I think we're up to 4 volumes again. But come the revolution. So it's about that human thing, that we can't not do that. You need some, this is stuff that we did in the value introduction, disruptive innovation. You know that idea? It's about picking a fight. Do something outrageous. So if you want to be radical, here's my suggestion to you when you go back. When you go back to wherever you work, get to your human resources department. And that's, funny enough, that's the only department that has human in the title. And there's huge irony in that. Because if you look at your job description, get your job description out, or get your role requirement out, or whatever it is, because there's loads of these things. Get them out and have a look. And they'll have some of these words on it. And they'll have other words on it, of course, because you'll all be graduates, and you'll all be really smart and postgraduate. You'll have all that stuff, and CPDs, all that stuff. But what you want to do is find out if it's got any of those words on it. And if it hasn't, ask for them to be included. Why is it when you're getting your personal development program, we don't say your compassion was a bit downish, your empathy was a bit lacking? What's the story with forgiveness? Why do we not do that? Are we a bit afraid of that? Is it something that scares us? It shouldn't. It's part of it. It's what makes it. It's what that connection. The professional stuff wasn't meant to supplant those. It was meant to add value to them. But what's happened over the years is we've shifted the other way all the time. We've moved towards the professional stuff. That kept us safe. And there's examples of it all the time. All the time. So be human. The violence stuff, and which is probably the same as some of the challenges that you face. If we think about it like that iceberg, and I knew you could have visualized an iceberg. That's there so that I find it, I don't have to visualize it. We always work in a bit that's above the waterline. That's an easy bit to work on, because we see that. We chip away at it. We know if we've got a big chunk off or a wee chunk off. We know what we're doing. That's where we investigate murders up there. But we're not making a blind bit of difference to the size of the iceberg. It just bobs up a little bit. And if we want to shrink the iceberg, we need to raise the temperature of the water. And that's big stuff. And for Scotland, that's stuff like equality. It's stuff like gender equality. If we don't fix violence against women, we will never fix violence. We just won't. You can't protect children unless you protect families. It's like child poverty. I like the idea of child poverty. I like the idea of family, and we deal with it like that. That connection to things. Those relationships that already exist, where you're teaching a child, but in actual fact, you probably need to work with a family in order to teach that child. I'd like to see education being spelled with a small e more often than not, and not a capital E. Because another thing that happens with professionalism is teachers have taken the responsibility for education. We'll teach our children, give them here, we'll teach them. And then when it goes wrong, what are you doing about it? Eh? What are you doing about it? What about these bloody results? Outrageous. What about this behavior in the streets? What are you doing about it? Every guy who's in the jail was in school. Went through school, and I'll bet you, and I always ask this, tell me if there's, when you get to that career stuff, is there options in there for heroin addict or alcoholic or prostitute or murderer? Do we have options in there for that? No, we don't. We don't. What you used to do was kick them out of school. Then I used to get them to jail. We ran a gangs thing in the East End of Glasgow, which made a huge difference to there, along with social work, health, education, housing. It was a real collaborative effort, and it was great. And it worked a treat. And we're always saying that was a great gangs initiative that was there. The police were out there with a gangs task force. We also, in education in Glasgow, reduced exclusions by 85%. I think that had a lot to do with it. Because the kids that we would have been locking up because they were only in school, weren't they running about, they were actually in school. Somebody was dealing with them in there, where they should have been. Hugely important. So it's that connection. The other thing in Scotland, of course, is alcohol's a big issue. My name is Scotland, I have a problem. Now, alcohol doesn't make you violent, but it's not a healthy thing when you have too much of it. There is a connection. Although I know there are some chairs of licensing boards, particularly through in Edinburgh, who sees no connection between alcohol and violence or antisocial behaviour. So Edinburgh's obviously moved to another planet when I was there looking. Because if you walk into any cells, you'll smell alcohol. Walk into any A&E department on a Friday and Saturday night, you'll smell alcohol and blood. That's what you'll get. So there's a link there and a connection to it. So those big things are hugely important, particularly that equality thing. Equality is hugely important. The most equal societies in the world are the least violent. The most unequal are the most violent. So there's something in that which is hugely important, and I'll speak a wee bit more about that as we go along. This was work that was done by a guy called Vincent Felitti. You've maybe seen it before. This was emerging evidence for me 5 years ago. And it was 2 longitudinal studies in the States around children, about what happened to them. And it was about this notion about adverse childhood experiences. And what he established was that when a woman is pregnant, her principal responsibility is to create a safe environment for the baby to develop, and that's what her responsibility is. But if she's living with a violent or aggressive partner, she can't do that. She just can't. She can't look after herself. And the other things like alcohol, smoking, all these things will impact on it, but that violence thing in particular. And what happens is, if she's living in that stressful situation, remember that sense of coherence? Her body will create stress hormones like cortisol. That'll damage the baby's development. And then the human thing kicks in when the baby's born. You know how when babies are born, women, oxytocin, you know the cuddle hormone? You know when you get a cuddle, it makes you feel good. Oxytocin it is. I know that's maybe too much information for you. My wife gets a spike in oxytocin just watching George Clooney on the telly. We actually drink his coffee just because it's George Clooney. Although she likes it, but I don't think that's true. We actually went to Italy last year to Lake Como, and we were staying in this lovely Argenio, this lovely wee village, and I said, it's really nice in Italy. Glad you found this. Yeah, and it was fine. My wife had found out this is where we should go. So we went out in the lake one day in a boat, and as we were going out in the boat, the woman who was part of the team that were organising this boat we've been out on gave her this book. And all along Lake Como, if you've been there, fabulous palaces and houses, fabulous. And here's this page folded over, and an X. That's where George lives. George lived just about 500 yards from where we were. And here's me thinking when we're going to walk along the front at night for the romance. It was, but it wasn't the romance for me. Anyway. But what happens is, as humans, we'll adapt to the environment we're born into. We're really good at that. That's why we occupy the planet, all over the planet, because we adapt to that environment. And if you bring a child up in a war zone, you'll create a warrior. That's what happens. That's how sometimes you'll get wee boys who'll look at you in the face when you're speaking, and as humans, we're uncomfortable with that. You're uncomfortable if somebody can't look you in the face. That wee boy's been trained not to look at his dad in the face because he's looking at me, he'll punch him. Don't look at me like that. Who are you looking at? It's seen as insolence. But then he goes to school and he can't do it. And you think, why is he not looking at me? There's something I don't like him. He's sleek at that. He's developed to survive in the world that he's born into. And it's hugely difficult to change that, although we can change it. So you'll have these kids who are like that. Then they'll go to nursery school, and they'll be the kids who won't play well with other kids. They won't communicate well. They won't negotiate, or they won't compromise. They won't share toys. They can get a wee bit angry now and again. They get themselves a wee bit detached. And then when they go to primary school, they'll probably get further detached. And that becomes even more important then, because instead of taking on the technical skills that teachers are absolutely brilliant at delivering, like reading and writing and all that stuff, they can't do it. So they get further and further behind. They become even more frustrated. And then they'll start to act up. There's a young guy who works for us at the Violence Reduction Unit called James, and James has had a really difficult life. He's spoken to lots of people. He's very impressive. James Docherty, if you see him speaking, go along. And James' first recollection has been held upside down and been struck by a belt by his father. But he was more frightened of his mother because her violence was random. They were both alcoholics. And James talks about being accused of an attention seeker. And in actual fact, he was a connection seeker. And lots of the kids that are acting out, they're trying to get connected because they're living in stress. It's a natural thing to try and connect and reach out to somebody else. And if that's somebody else as a teacher who actually is giving them a row because they're not doing something, at least somebody's paying attention to them. At least somebody's focused on them, and it's hugely important. So they're not learning to read and write. Then they'll go to secondary school. And it doesn't get better because what happens then is we issue them with hormones, whether they need them or not. And it's my experience, sometimes it's better without them altogether. But they go there, and then they become really difficult. They start to get involved in risky behavior, which is fine. Another reason why we're top of the food chain. Risky behavior is what we do. But we do it from a background of being able to judge risk. We know, let's not try heroin. We know, let's not stab somebody in the chest. But if you don't have those things, then that's likely the sort of stuff you'll do. And it's important to, another bit of emerging evidence from a professor of child psychiatry, I think it's, in Ottawa, called Richard Tremblay. He was over speaking at a conference that the Medical Research Council organised in Edinburgh about 3-4 years ago. And I was asked to respond to him because he was speaking about violence. Although he spoke for an hour and a half, and I think I understood at least 7 words. You know, it was really one of those over-the-head stuff. But anyway, we went for dinner later, and I asked him, how is it we learn to be violent? And he said, it's much easier to think of that the other way around. We learn how not to be violent. We learn to negotiate, to compromise, to communicate, to empathize, to problem solve. And so that notion for violence gets shifted down the tactical options menu, and you don't have to use it. So some young men don't leave house at night and think, I think I'll be violent today. I think I'll be disruptive today. It's the only response they have. It's the only emotion that they have and that they can use. They don't know anything else. So it's not a conscious thing of saying, you're just doing this to wind me up. No, I'm just doing this because it's the only thing I know what to do. Now, the violence one stays there. We still have that capacity for violence. Although what we get now is we get governments to organize it for us. But we have that capacity there, but it gets pushed down and we don't need it anymore. Then they might start alcohol, drugs, all of that stuff. And they may get through that time. They may get through it and be okay. Don't get a scar on their face, because a scar on their face will limit somebody's life forever. It'll limit the relationships they can pick up and establish, the jobs that they get. And think about this. If somebody's got a scar on their face, it means they were a victim. It doesn't mean they were violent. They were the victim of violence. And young men are more likely to be the victim of violence than anybody else. They're also more likely to be the perpetrators. But we categorize them and put them in and dismiss them. And that's why when we get back to that jobs description, we need redemption on it. We need to forgive people. Because what happens is some young guy at 16 or 17 gets caught. And here's a secret. Don't tell Police Scotland I said this, for goodness sake. We catch the feckless and the stupid. Sorry, they catch the feckless and the stupid. That's who we catch. And we don't catch them all. So what happens about the ones who were just as bad that we didn't catch? They go on and live good lives because they get through it. But the ones who have got a couple of previous convictions can't get a job. So what do we hope they're going to do? Stay in the house and no bother us? That's not going to happen. So I would rather they were actually out there paying taxes rather than spending taxes. So the idea of redemption and doing that, hugely important. And the ones who don't get through that as well might end up as alcoholics, drug addicts. They're the ones who will keep their life expectancy, I think it's 12 years currently less, from one end of the city to the other. That's disgraceful. And it's the same in lots of cities. So it's not just about Glasgow, it's like the same in lots of cities. So hugely important. Adverse childhood experiences. Vincent Felitti. So it's part of that evidence. It's cast iron. Cast iron. That's why fixing violence against women is so hugely important. But in amongst that too, of course, in terms of equality and gender equality, is the role of men. Because I'm not sure men know what it is to be a man anymore in 21st century. I'm not sure we know. I remember taking my youngest daughter, Rachel, to the nursery when she was, well, nursery age. She's now 27. I think it's 8, but I better not say that. At 27. And I took her to the nursery and they said, "Oh, you're babysitting today?" I said, no, I'm actually her dad. I'm actually parenting today. I do it every day. Sometimes the systems get in the way. Sometimes the systems don't encourage us in there. Sometimes young men will not see a positive male role model until they get to secondary school, and sometimes not even then. It's hugely important. And in terms of relationships, where do they get the confirmation of healthy relationships? Did they get it off the internet and the pornography that's there? Is that healthy relationships? I think not. So they need to get some notion about what relationships are, how you get on with other human beings, how you treat other human beings with respect, irrespective of who they are, whether they're teachers, whether they're female, whether they're male, no matter what color they are. Equity is hugely important. So it's not just about the gender equality, it's about equality. But gender equality is one that if we start on that, we can make a huge difference to it. Because if we don't fix violence against women, we will never fix violence. This was some work that was done way back in 2004 by Future Skills. And what they wanted to do was find out what skills were lacking so they could organize some more CPD courses. And they sent out something like, I think it was 180,000 questionnaires, got them back. And this particular chart relates to young people and people in low-paid employment. And you'll see that what they found was that was lacking was planning and organizing, customer handling, problem solving, teamwork, and oral communication. Those are, for the psychologists among you, non-cognitive skills. Although I don't like the skills word. Let's call them human attributes. That's the ability to make good decisions about yourself, to establish and maintain relationships, to problem solve, to fix things, to get over things, to compromise, to negotiate, to influence. Those are important. And numeracy and literacy were way down. But we do lots of stuff in numeracy and literacy, quite rightly, because you know that in terms of literacy, it's a huge and powerful indicator of neglect in terms of the amount of words, you know, all that stuff. But we spend a lot of time doing numeracy and literacy because we can measure if somebody can do more today than they did yesterday. But in terms of the emotional stuff, it's far more difficult to check out. That's that professional thing kicking in again. And if we think about violence like a contagious process, because it's a disease, because we treat violence, as Heather said in the introduction, as a public health issue. So I just want to, because violence is my thing, so you should know this. There are 3 elements that are the same about every disease, everything that happens, no matter what it is. There'll be clustering, epidemic waves, and transmission. Those are 3 key elements that exist in them all. So if you think about clustering, this is the nice end of the tune, Scottish Index of Deprivation. This is the no so nice end of the tune. This is where lots of us were probably born, but this is where we moved to as quickly as we possibly could, when we could buy houses and get out of that and look after ourselves. That's where the victims of violence live. That's where the offenders live, and that's where the incidents happen. We used to have this thing in the police, and it was a phrase, please excuse the language, it was no shit Sherlock. And that slope of social determinants applies to everything to do with ill health. If you're thinking about low birth weight babies, if you're thinking about uptake for breastfeeding, if you're thinking about smoking cessation, that slope will be exactly the same. If you want to have educational attainment, then you turn it around that way, because the slope would go in the other direction. That's why, and I always like to say this, that's why when we say that this particular school area, this local authority, they get fabulous results. They must be really good teachers. Oh, really? They get fabulous results because they've got really good parents who get involved and support what you do. James Heckman's a Nobel laureate, an economist. He's the guy that came up with the 71. For every pound you spend in early years, you'll need to spend 7 in adolescence to get the same result. And he said, a major determinant of successful schools is successful families, because teachers can only teach what families provide, and they work better when they work together. So that's why it's hugely important that you stop taking responsibility for education with a capital E and start to get other people involved. I know it's really scary, because you are the professionals and know everything. But you need to start doing that. Not because it's cheaper, not because it's an idea that we have today, it's because it's far more effective. Far more effective for children. And then when we start to think, then that's that clustering. So if that were a chart that was about cholera, we would know where to put the clean water. We would know where it was, would be up there. And then if we think about transmission and epidemic waves, this is the fight after school. Now, it could be for something entirely different, but be anything. Maybe the wee boys don't want to fight, but they're conformed to an expectation, they're conformed to that norm that happens to be there. They'll fight. And how that will spread on is, then maybe their mums and dads will fight, or their big brothers will fight. You were hitting my wee boy today. Bang. And it goes on. And that's how, Scotland, we've got that word thrawn. You know, we're really good at bearing grudges. We've got evidence of family feuds that have been running for years. And then when you get them back, it's one fight that happened at school, or one punch, or one, you called my mother up. And then 15 years later, they're still, every time they see each other, they're fighting. One of the things we did with the gangs initiative is we took 85 gang people away for a day. Jack Black, from Mine Store. Jack used to be a social worker in Easterhouse. So we blackmailed him into coming along. We didn't. We asked him, and he came voluntarily. And he did a 2-day course with them. And they were sitting in tables like this. And there was 85 of them there, and we only had to eject 2 for fighting. But the week before, they were stabbing each other. That was a result. And Jack had said to them at the start, what do you want to get out of this week? Tell us these couple of days. What do you want to get out of the couple of days? And we were saying, Jack, these guys will hardly speak to you. You'll need to work hard at this. These are no folk who are spending £2,500 for 2 days, And then one guy put his hand up at the back, and Jack said, right, on you go. What do you want to get out of this? And this was a boy, 21, 22, scar on the face. If you saw him, he looked tasty. And he pointed to another table and he said, see him over there? I've been fighting him since I was 11. I want to know why. Because we think everybody else thinks different from us. Because that's exactly the question I was thinking about. Why the hell are you fighting him? He lives in the same street. He's unemployed like you. His aspirations are as low as yours. His expectations are as low as yours. He's named money. He's not got a girlfriend. You and him are in the same boat. Why are you fighting each other? So there's that notion there. So that will carry on. That's an epidemic wave. That's how it's transmitted. And it can be transmitted from generation to generation. A son who's in the same gang that their dad was in. But I think we've broken that a wee bit in the East End. So what we need to do then is we think about, in relation to that ecological model, we think about individuals. We need those, I always leave that word up there so that I can say I hate it. Skills. Professional skills. Human attributes, I like to think of them as opposed to skills. It's like parenting skills. I always get the notion there's somebody somewhere with a PowerPoint ready to show me how to be a dad. And you can't. It's like that, that idea of straightforward and simple, complicated and complex. Straightforward and simple is baking a cake. Follow the recipe, put it in, bang, in the oven, it works. The complicated one is, let's put a man in the moon. That was complicated. Did it? Because they worked it through. Complex, that's being a parent. Because that's complicated, and sometimes it's easy, and it's really difficult. And particularly, I found with our first daughter, it was largely an experiment. We weren't sure what was going to happen. She turned out fine, but the truth of the matter was it was really difficult. But we had mums and dads to help us do it as well. So that's how it comes on. So the good stuff can get passed on, but the bad stuff can get passed on too. So those things are really important. In terms of relationships, parenting is really important. No good parents or bad parents, but parents who can be as good as they can be. You've got kids in the schools at 190 days a year, 191 days a year. So how do you think you're going to change the... Well, you can make a difference, but hell, there's a whole range of other time that we can get involved in this. It's hugely important. So parents as good as they can be. In terms of community, the cultural norms, the things we accept, and that community can be in a school. I mean, some of the stuff they're doing right now with the Raising Attainment for All program, which is using that improvement science, I hate that word science, but it's about changing little things and making a difference to them. And that little change will start to, and it changes from the bottom up, no a big down, top-down stuff. That's really important. And you can start to change the norms in the school, create a contagion of quality, a contagion of improvement. You can use that same thing to do that. The societal stuff, inequality, hugely important. Scottishness, that's a big issue. You know that? How are you getting on? No bad. Have a great day. Oh, no sure. We've tried this before, it'll never work. We're doomed. Do you know that one? Oh dear, oh dear. We're the world's worst. We need to aspire, and we need to aspire to build cathedrals and no garden sheds. And if we're going to fail, let's fail bloody spectacularly. Do that. Do no harm, but let's have a go at it. Let's look for that disruptive innovation. Let's just do it. You know the right things to do. So, Jim McCormack, he's the Scotch rep for the Joseph Rowntree Foundation. Him and I are on a commission, and this was something that he said at commission that I thought struck home to me. Reducing the attainment gap is necessary, it's feasible, and it's measurable. We can do it, and we should do it. It's the right thing to do. And that report that comes from was done by Sue Ellis at Strathclyde University and one other, I can never remember the other's name. And it's really a straightforward read, and there's a list of things that you might want to think about. And one of them in it is engage with parents. And be innovative. Be disruptive. See the ones who don't turn up at the parents' night? Take the parents' night to them. 8 in the morning. Hi, yeah. I'm here to speak about. And sometimes, and you'll know, that sometimes the parents you need to teach how to do the homework before they can actually help with the homework. It's really difficult. Really difficult. But we need to think about it. We need to think about how we might do that differently. And these are all the strategies that are there. And there's loads of them. And I don't mind them. I mean, curriculum for excellence is fine. It's not a curriculum for mediocrity, thank goodness. Getting it right for every child. Well, why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you have that as a name? I think that's pretty good. In fact, there's a bit of me that's a wee bit worried where we have to write it down. Because I'm sure in Scotland we don't actually like kids, we just tolerate them. Do you not think? We do. Listen to how they get spoken to. Just listen to how kids get spoken to sometimes. We segregate them. We separate them. That's how when the minister spoke yesterday about a summit for kids, it's going to be really scary. Because they're going to say stuff that's going to scare us. I was saying to somebody the other day, in fact, I think I said it to the minister last night, that if I'm in a room with head teachers, there's a couple of things you can say just to get their attention. One of them is, I've found, is if you say to head teachers, how much involvement do your parents have in the governance of your school? That really worries them. You can actually see the body language changing immediately about, really? And all this stuff happens. So that it will be difficult. But I think we need to listen. And we need to listen openly and understand what's going to happen. The idea that local authorities come up, you'll get them through the door at every local authority. Here's all the services we have. Pick one. Oh, we don't need any of them. Oh, well, okay. They move on. How did you think your services were? Great, wonderful, or just terrific? And sometimes the service that's there is not the one that you need. You need something entirely different. Sometimes these kids and families need something entirely different. Sometimes they just need to help themselves. And that's a difficult thing to do as well. So we have all of these things here, which are absolutely fine. But the truth of the matter is, they won't change anything. That's just the framework that allows it to happen. And it's a pretty good framework, I reckon. 99% of failure occurs at delivery. Strategies never fail. And it wasn't a civil servant that said that. But they don't. I'm always keen. If somebody in here has been in charge of a strategy that's failed, give me a shout. They don't. We just move on to something else. It happens and fails at delivery. It happens at that end. And that's how that changing things from the bottom up, from people who are doing it every day of the week in small bits, That's the stuff that will make a difference. That will make a huge difference to it. So that idea of changing. Leo Tolstoy said that about history. An infinitely large number of infinitesimally small actions. That's what history is made up of. But if we get back to that process thing in leader, what we want is we want a leader with a big plan. And we've got a project initiation document and milestones, because you'll usually have been in a Prince 2 course. You get one of them. If you've not been in that, it's a CPD. Tick the box next time you go. Fabulous course. Prince 2. You need this big plan. You need to deliver everything, because as humans, we want to fix things. That's what we want to do. We lean into them. And sometimes we just need to step back and take a wee breath and think about what we're going to do. And don't just immediately lean in and try to fix it. Because for your own well-being, you're not going to fix it. It's not there to be fixed. It's there to be made better. And that's our job, to make it better, to be better tomorrow than we were today. Even if you make it better just for one person that day. And if the one person's you, fine. Really good. But if it's for a kid that's in the room, huge difference it makes. Huge difference. So we need to think about that. And this is my favorite guy in the world. And sadly, I saw somewhere just recently that they thought he died. Anyway, I'm not sure. I refuse to believe it. Now, here's a boy. This is 8th of June, 89. 2 days before, there had been, they reckon, almost 1 million people in Tiananmen Square. And the army had come in and lots of people lost their lives. This is 2 or 3 days later. And there's tanks coming into the square. And he says, that's not right. I'm not having that. What can I do about that? No strategy, no policy, no standard operating procedures. There certainly wasn't a health and safety risk taken out. And he just stood in front of the tank and he said, no. And if you watch it, if you remember it, you can Google it, it's still there. The tank reverses a bit and tries to get around him. The reason it didn't knock him down is because there's another human in the tank. They were already connected. He actually climbed up in the tank and spoke to folk in it. He did that because he just thought, I'm not doing this. So we can all do this. That's what changes history. Not the big things. Not the minister's big speech. No CEOs. It's every day. One teacher, one pupil, turning them around and making a difference. That's the thing that makes a difference. Every day of the week it happens. And the reason we don't talk about it is, one, it happens so often. And the other thing is, we can't measure it. We can't measure how many kids are not in the jail today because some teacher took an interest in them. We can't measure how many kids are in good relationships because a teacher put their hand on their shoulder when they needed it. We can't measure that. But can I tell you, you know it and I know it. I think Frank Dick said yesterday, it's not something you can actually see, but you can feel it. My wife was a teacher, retired this year. Just as I retired, she retired, and that wasn't the plan, I have to tell you. So the reason I come to these events is so that I don't have a big list of things I need to do. But anyway, it was that I remember some of the stuff she used to get from, you know, I mean, she retired this year. She was into the school at the summer to find out how her kids went, and she did history and modern studies, and you think, so you're connected. You can't do it unless you're connected and you care, that relationship stuff. But what I really like about him is he's got 2 bags of messages. Have you noticed that? I think it's really cool. He's went out to the shops and then saw this and thought, sod this, I'm not having this. And his wife will be back in the flat thinking, you left here 2 years ago to go for the shops. And he'll come back in with a story about, listen, darling, I was standing in front of this tank. Aye, right. Get the tea on. So there's a notion around that. And if you think it's brave, and it probably is, a couple of tanks, that's what he was standing in front of. You never see that picture. There's a whole battalion of bleeding tanks there. So, I mean, taking on one tank, I know boys in the East End of Glasgow and in Governor would take on a tank. It's not an issue for them. But taking on a whole battalion is an entirely different thing. But he did that. So when we get to that stage of needing that practical wisdom, that's the thing I was speaking about earlier when we were talking about Declan Haney and stuff. Practical wisdom is that combination of moral will and moral skill, knowing the right thing to do and actually doing it. And that's what he did. He knew the right thing to do, and he did it. He didn't wait on somebody telling him to do it. He just knew it was the right thing to do, and that's what he did. And we need more of that. And that's a human thing. That's a human thing. So it'll not be, I mean, I'm not sure if moral appears in the job description somewhere, or moral wisdom appears on it, or moral skill. It probably doesn't. But we need to think of these things and value them the same way as we value the professional stuff, and you get a CPD for it. And that failure, not to be worried about failure. I mean, really embrace it. You just need to get on with it. I remember when I was deputy head of the CID, I used to have a frame behind my desk that had the 2 times table in it. And it said, the police, we need to start low. Anyway, it said 2 times 1, 2. 2 times 2, 4. 2 times 3, 7. 2 times 4, 8. 2 times 5, 10. And I went right all the way up to 2 times 12, 24. And the only one I got wrong was the 2 times 3, which should have been 6, just in case you thought I didn't know. See the number of people who come into my office? And they go, right, you are, boss. Excuse me, sir, do you know that one up there's wrong? I said, right, hang on. I've got 12 sums up there, and I got 1 wrong. Why are you not telling me about the 11 I got right? Why are you not doing that? Because, the 1 wrong sucks the life out of you. I got 11 right, for goodness sake. And as teachers, you know that. There'll be some kids, if they get 5 out of 20, it's a result. It's an absolute result. For other kids, if they only get 19 out of 20, you think, well, maybe you should have got the 20th. So we need to understand that, and that's where teachers at the front end, dealing with that every day, and relationships that understand the kids that say it, you know that. You do it every day. And that's that Aristotle you like. I found a book on the plane about with Aristotle. That's I've got these quotes. That notion about excellence, that contagion of excellence, you can actually make that happen. And very quickly, I just finished with this story. When we were doing the gang stuff, 2008, I got a phone call from Kenny McCaskill, Big Kenny, who was paying us at that time. And he said, I've got this pal, he said, who writes screenplays. And he's wanted to do one about Glasgow and gangs. Could he come and meet you? So he did. Paul Laverty was his name. So I met him a few times. He works for Ken Loach, and the film they made was The Angel Share, right? So, Paul Brannigan. Paul starred in The Angel Share, BAFTA winner. Did films now with Scarlett Johansson. When we go to Parliament with him, that's all they want to know. What was Scarlett Johansson like to snog? That's all they want to know. Paul served 7 years in the jail for firearms offences. His mum and dad, his mother, he was a methadone baby. His father was an alcoholic. He was excluded from school from about 11, hardly back at school. Could barely read or write. Went into Parliament on his 7 years, and he still holds the record up there for being in, no isolation, they don't call it that, but being in restricted. He holds the record up there. That's how difficult he was. But he's a good football player. And one of the prison officers up there got him involved in football, and he started to get involved and keep himself fit. And the prison officer said, you should get involved in coaching, Paul. You should do that. No, I'm not good at that. And he wasn't good at that because he could barely read. He could barely read. And the prison officer knew that. So said to him, I'll help you out. So he got him a dictionary. So every time Paul heard a word or saw a word, he would write it down. And then he'd look it up at night and write it down so he'd remember it. So, Paul was working for us in the gangs, running football stuff. Paul Laverty met him and thought he'd be good for the lead because he wasn't an actor to start with. Got him down to do a screen test. He could only read the script because a prison officer took an interest in him. And he got a BAFTA. Then he texts me from Cannes. I'm at the Cannes Film Festival, John. It's really warm here. And I just text back saying, sod off. He did that because somebody took an interest in him and absolutely changed his life. And now Education Scotland have actually got something going in Parliament. Because every young man at Parliament will be a dad very soon. And when they come out, if your dad's in the jail and you're a wee boy, you're 84 times more likely to go to jail than a wee boy whose dad isn't. 84 times more likely. So why are we not preventing that? That's a role for education, and that's something we're already doing there, and it will make a huge difference to it. Children's Parliament, but I'm on the board, so I'm declaring an interest. When we're talking about a summit for children and children's participation, we need to make sure that we absolutely listen to kids. And the Children's Parliament are fabulous. They did Streets Ahead in Glasgow. It was great. And what we found is, see, in Glasgow, the kids were concerned with the same things that we were concerned with. Alcohol, sectarianism, violence. They were concerned with the same stuff. We actually thought they'd be, we need more sweetie shops, or we need more games, or we need more. They didn't. It's the same things that matter. They're just the same issues. I was in Belfast doing some work with the Department of Justice there. And these big murals on the side of it that normally involve Kalashnikovs and the Queen and Union Jacks or not Union Jacks and balaclavas. This was there. Frederick Douglass was born a slave, an American. This is up on a wall at the side of a house, and I just think it's hugely important. Hugely important. And that conformity expectation, you give kids new expectations every day by what you do and how you do it. It's a fabulous job. I know that some days it'll not seem like that. You'll be in that chaos zone, trying very hard to get into the just coping zone, and thriving is just, well, that's a hallucination. But you absolutely do, and if you just help one person every day, it'll make a huge difference. Thanks very much.